You want me?
I got it. Okay. I think we should be recording. Yes. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us on this lovely Sunday to discuss Take Care, Vera by Alexis Rivierre and Tiffany J. Sutton. So just to give you a little format, this will be a 30 to 45 minute artist talk. Will be a conversation between Michael Bailey and myself, Lauren Cardenas, discussing the work with these two wonderful artists. And then towards the end, we will have questions available, or audience members can ask questions. So to give you a little back story about Museum Blue, it was founded by artists in 2014. It was a project space in St. Louis, Missouri, and then it is thus now evolved to be adaptable for the current moment. That is, it was a reaction towards COVID, and it serves as a platform to support and further explorations of contemporary art practices. The current co-directors are Michael Bailey and Lauren Cardenas. The founders were Gina Grafos and Carly Trosclair, along with Michael Bailey and myself. Take Care, Vera is a collaboration by multidisciplinary artist Alexis Rivierre and photographer Tiffany J. Sutton. Rivierre is based out of New York City, and Sutton is based out of St. Louis, Missouri. So we're gonna kind of, oh, actually we're going back. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll jump in then, and I'm just going to as we kind of enter into the conversation and some of the questions that Lauren and I had for the artist, I'm going to just read kind of the intro paragraph into the curatorial statement, and I think that'll kind of help frame or sort of give us somewhat of a sounding board for ideas that that this project has brought forth, for certainly for Lauren and I, and then just through the work of working with these two artists and conversations that have unfolded. So as we began the process of working with these two artists, themes quickly began presenting themselves: ideas of care, relationships and their complex dynamics, personal and cultural histories, strengths, rituals, actions, energies, performance, and negotiating the politics of perception related to identity are just some of the topics we are presented with when experiencing the work of these two artists. These matters seem to echo and call to one another as we spend time with artists' works. The relationship between the two bodies of work unfolds as a kind of conversation between longtime friends who have shared, felt, and endured a history. And of course, these histories lay a foundation of unjustness that is perpetuated in this present moment. So that sort of is, as I said, that's the intro into the curatorial statement. And you can certainly, anyone can visit our website at Museum Blue and read the full curatorial statement. But Lauren and I just thought that might be a way to kind of begin the conversation.
And so we're going to start with, oh, come on, there we go, Alexis Rivierre, and this piece, X Down. So the question that we have is, how does performance play a role in your practice?
Okay, so, well, first, thank you for having me today. So performance takes a role or plays a role in my practice as a way to activate characters. I create characters from reclaimed clothing in my closet, create these masked characters, these entities that sometimes are personas, other times are characters separate from myself or parts of myself. And they serve as a gateway for storytelling. So in many ways, I'm working with personal narrative and events of the world around me and showing up either pre-COVID, really impromptu into a public space, and engaging with an unassuming public as these characters and with these kind of gestural provocations. And now more so, I guess you could say, in front of a camera, more solo performative gestures have been taking place as a way to kind of build story. So it's one of those ways, and I get the question a lot of times, like, why don't I set an audience? I typically don't set an audience for my performances. I'm really thinking about this idea of who the audience is. I really enjoy it being the true response of someone who's unassuming of the art, who has to naturally respond to what's going on without knowing that they're engaging in an art project, versus, staging it for an art public who would be coming, intentionally to eat upon this art piece, and really thinking about this idea of eating the other, myself being the other, especially as this masked identity, but also as a Black woman. And so performance also, for me, in the way that I do it, activates this conversation of the politics of refusal as well. So this idea of refuting who gets to eat upon and consume upon my body as I enact upon these stories. So that's the role that performance plays in my work.
That is quite interesting, because some of the performances that you have done in the past have been interactive. And so this is more of a transition to developing these characters and kind of almost like reacting on the performances that you have had in previous, like it's the lineage of how you've kind of began at that, having an audience, like, and interacting with said audience, and then kind of removing oneself and creating more control for you as the artist.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would say that the pandemic plays a role in that. That's something that we all as artists have had to deal with, is how things adapt to the current time. And so having been in kind of isolation, this role of a true public kind of disappeared and dissolved. And I think I've only done 2 public kind of show pop-ups in the last 2 years, but it definitely changed the way that I have to approach the work, for sure.
Do you feel, Alexis, like in the work, in the performance work, and as you said, sort of where you take on these personas, these characters that you've created, and then the mask is always like a significant component of the costuming and how the characters present themselves. And do you feel like that entering into that character and then the anonymity of the mask, and I mean, how does that impact the performance for you? Or do you think of it that it does? Or
Absolutely. One, masks in essence are transformative entities, right? And so, throughout history, whether they've been used for ritual or in like costuming in theater, they're a way to assume another identity or to allow something maybe even from within you to be revealed. And so for me, it's, I have performative rules. So oftentimes it's this kind of masking of me transforming. It allows me to touch into zones that I otherwise probably wouldn't feel comfortable, like places I wouldn't feel comfortable going otherwise. And so, yeah, for me, this idea of a character, as someone with a painting background, these have become my paintings, right? This has become my abstract form of expression that is now happening through these kind of wearable art forms. So yeah, this idea of masking allows this kind of transfiguration, this otherness to, it's weird because like in real life, this otherness exists, this idea of me being the other in relationship to whiteness often shows up, right? But really putting that forward by redoing that through a mask, like pushing that, making that louder, this idea of difference, and then having people respond to that difference. Yeah, I think that answers your question, but I'm not sure.
great. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that was great, Alexis. Thank you for kind of sharing that with us and like expanding a little bit more insight on your practice and how your practice has transformed from pre-COVID to now, and how that's starting to make those connections to a larger concept or conceptual undertone within your work.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I really appreciate it too, Alexis, because it sort of is, it certainly runs parallel to a lot of, or some of the ideas I talk with my students sometimes about, the function of art and what it can permit as a vehicle, and the various forms that artwork takes on. And of course, this idea of sort of like inhabiting a character that's been sort of created, and that sort of fictitious space that presents, allowing allowing for the exploration, the provocation, the sort of addressing challenging things, that can sometimes maybe be insurmountable, at least seeming in reality, so. But
it gives permission,
yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Oh, I keep doing this wrong. Sorry, guys. So Mike, do you want to take it away?
Yeah. So, and I guess, thinking along the lines of performance, Tiffany, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this particular photograph. And I guess the reason Laura and I were thinking about this photograph in relation to performance is that it has this corner kind of like kind of choreographed element, or where you are very purposefully working with that double exposure, but it's not just straight up documentary. It's sort of like and in that composing, the kind of performative aspect. I'm just curious, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's more personal than performative. It's a way to, okay, so I've always wanted a sister. I have an older brother, but he lives in California. And during the time when my dad was alive, he was very sick at this particular stage of his life. And I didn't have a sibling my age who was talking to me about our father. So I created one. And I would have dreams that I was a twin, like all throughout childhood. Her name was Stephanie. My name was Tiffany. Obviously, my name is Tiffany. And we would have little adventures together, but we would also just support each other. So if I was depressed, she would be happy for me and be the happy twin and really take that burden of sadness and depression off me. And vice versa. And I would, if she was manic, because I'm also bipolar, so she was, and that plays a little bit into having a twin as well. It was just the balance of someone who is quote unquote normal, or I guess maybe I say mentally healthy, and then me, who was not very quote unquote normal and who was obviously mentally ill. So it was, the idea of having the twin is just something that supports me.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about again through the conversation with Lauren, it's sort of like there is this kind of performance of a sibling, doing things for the sibling, like looking out after, looking over, sort of being present for, and performing that act of being a sibling, and I really love that idea in it, as sort of what the image begins to describe and suggest.
It's almost like this fictional twin is taking care of me when I need to be taken care of. I'm trying not to be a person that needs to be taken care of for my mom, since she was mainly the caretaker for my dad. So in my world, I had another person that could take care of me, and I would be fine because I had the second person, but that way she wouldn't have to worry about me. And I could just be the daughter and not this person who's also ill and needs support.
Right.
Agreed. Oh, sorry. No, totally. And like, especially in the way that this image is constructed, as the one image of you like looking over to the other image of this young individual who has this almost like pause look of like, oh my gosh, like what's about to happen, and this level of comfort that is coming from the second entity of that level of care that a sibling whether older, same age, younger, it is that familial relationship that I think individuals long for. I'm the youngest in my family. My sisters are 7 and 11 years older than me. So there was that time period where being raised as an only child, where you don't have that connection. And so during situations of whether it's difficult times or more strenuous times, and like wanting someone to be there, of like always thinking of like, or longing for that individual to have support or have that support. And I think especially in the grouping of all the photos that you have showcased of your mom kind of caring for your father, and like this level of care that we see, and then we see the double exposure of you twice, and is longing to resolve care within yourself. And so I think it's a really kind of beautiful way of executing that in this kind of simple gesture that I think at times individuals take for granted, of that level of support and care. So it's nice to see it showcased.
Right.
It meant something profoundly special to me to make myself a twin and to perform an act of taking care of myself. And really, I mean, because I am not a twin, and I only have a brother. During this time, I was trying to take care of myself. So I made it's almost like I made another person just to be quote unquote normal. And I would play her part quite a bit in front of friends, family, school, job. And then I would have my reality at home or when I was alone. So I was actually, I mean, and in a way, I still kind of am. I still kind of play a role of being two people at once, because a little bit afraid of what people think when I am sick, and a little bit of not wanting them to know exactly that side of me, because for whatever reason, I feel like a little bit ashamed about it, kind of, and still haven't really reckoned with it. But in this particular scene, and this is when I started becoming bipolar. So this was a time where the doctors and we were both trying to figure out why I was happy and then sad and then happy again, all over the time, like all over the place. And once that happened, we discovered that, and it really did feel relief, actually, to know that something was going on, and that I wasn't just I'm not a twin, but it made me feel like there were two of me that could handle, as a partnership, we can handle the realities of my world.
Yeah, I really think about the show that that we have here in Take Care, Vera, and how it represents in some ways, these identities we take on, or these identities that we perform, these actions, these gestures, these things we do, depending upon the context that we find ourselves in, and so I just I was thinking about that in terms of that question for your work too, Tiffany, and the idea even of selecting the images as we were starting in the process of looking at the work from both of these artists, and like and you touched on this a little bit, Lauren, but the decision for this piece to be included in a body of work which is largely documenting the care of Tiffany's, the care that Tiffany's mother is providing for her father. But I think that this is so important because it talks about, that self-care that the artist, the person that witnesses, that is present, is needs to do in order to do their part, and the part that they arrived at to share with the world in this body of work, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. And I think like seeing the both of you kind of come together with these two bodies of work, and how those conversations of care in very, or I wouldn't say very different, but different executions, but having similar conceptual identities like come out through that, and this level of self-care. And what do these individuals that are presented to the larger audience, which leads me to our next question is, how do you view the concept of care in relationship to your work? And this is for both of you. So the next couple questions are going to be for the both of you, if you care to answer them together or in conversation, however you both feel comfortable.
Sure. I don't mind. If I could go first, Alexis, sorry.
Go for it.
So during this time, and this is before COVID, obviously, the idea of me being taken care of by my mom was something I didn't like, but also needed at the same time. So when I moved in, and during quarantine, we were separate. We lived in the same neighborhood, but we couldn't see each other. And then after COVID, the quarantine was over, we moved, my roommate and I moved, and we actually live below my mother now. So in a way, I've just kind of made myself her caregiver, and she's the caregiver of me because, she's the mother. So it always ends up she's taking care of me, and even more so than before. And we do little things together that really inform my work. We're always together. I'm always taking pictures of her. I make her take pictures of me. And we hang out like tons of time, like just hours upon hours hanging out together and watching the same programs, and really being these two women that take care of each other. And in my work, I do a lot of multiple exposures because I'm always giving that person in the picture someone that takes care of them. I usually photograph Black women, and it is a belief or maybe a feeling that quote unquote Black women will save the world, or they're really in charge of saving themselves and saving the world from its destruction. And who takes care of us? So who takes care of us if it's not us? So, and in this particular picture, the twin I needed, it also feels that way too. It's just, we're all taking care of other people in our lives as well as ourselves, but no one else is taking care of ourselves or taking care of us. And I try to share that in my work a lot, like I said before, but I think it really just comes out in this image. It's inspired by this image, that's all.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what you're saying, I think within both of the works is this idea of prioritizing self-care as an extension to creating community care for other people. As Tiff was just saying, like historically in the US, Black women have had a role of taking care of others in a domestic capacity, in a caretaker capacity, right? And even lingering now, like if you were to look into the research of it, social economic status may preclude you from partaking in self-care rituals as a woman of color, if you don't have the means, et cetera. And so we tend to still have this conversation of, do we get to have care, but we're still having these expectancies of taking care of the family and other people. And so, my point of entry, it was very personal, like I've mentioned, and like Tiffany's work, but also like I've mentioned before, my work is rooted in personal narrative. So often it's reflecting something that's recently or concurrently happening in my world. And so as my work is transforming over this past 2 years, is directly relating to not just the response of like COVID, right? But personal traumas that were happening. And so figuring out, where do I create boundaries? Where do I have acts of resistance and ritual in terms of cultivating self-care practice and really being able to, kind of set those boundaries, and this idea of like exhaling and clearing out of space and resetting and recharging yourself, as a result of realizing that I had not had that in my life, right? I needed to figure out how to cultivate that. And really how setting boundaries, for example, would be an act of self-care, right? And we're in this conversation time period where trying to figure out also like acts of resistance in a world where, we have violences happening to the Black body, not just as Black women, but people of color. And so like, how do we then, where does self-care fall into that? And is that a way to have this idea of political resistance? When I think about how a lot of my work comes together, it's, a lot of us assembled imagery connecting to what we're seeing content on the internet, mashed with this performative world and these characters, right? And realizing that we see and consume like Black death in cyclical form, especially over the last few years since things have been able to be accessed on your phone. And so like an act of self-care could simply be not looking, right? So this conversation of like, what do we need to do for survival, is really prevalent, and it's one that I was already tapping into personally, but then I started to see became the collective narrative of people of color, and especially women of color around the world. This narrative of what do I need to do to save myself right now? And when you're having that conversation, you look to your left and your right and you realize your neighbor needs it too. Then we begin to kind of form that for each other, and we're sharing. So, through the work, but also through like this vehicle of social media, you begin to share these ways of cultivating ritual, things that are helping you, and then it begins to ripple out, and we can all kind of impact and heal from it. So hopefully that's kind of happening through, or getting the read that's coming through the works as well.
No, I think that totally makes sense and thinking about the way that you've kind of talked about self-care, the both of you have, and care in general, especially with the demographic to the idea that self-care is a luxury, because most of the time, women of color, Black women thinking about that idea of always having to care for someone else. And the question is who cares for these individuals? And I think as the younger generation moves forward of this learning to set boundaries, and I think COVID kind of pushed everyone into that of learning to set boundaries with social media, learning to set boundaries with work, learning to set boundaries with individuals, has kind of pushed everyone into evaluating what does that mean for what does that mean for individuals? What does that mean for women of color? Even like just as a whole, individuals of color, or just generally like the population. I think it's always, I think prior to this moment, it was looked as this luxury of like, oh, you did self-care, like look at you. I was like, I don't have time, because whether it's working, child rearing, family rearing, these are all attributes that coincide with a working class individual. And it's, I remember thinking of my parents, who are immigrants, and thinking of the idea of, oh, I'm going to go take a nap because I need to recharge, or I need to, and it's the being laughed at, or thinking how that is an absurdity. And where does that, but now it's becoming more of this conversation of like, no, it's too much. This is too much. This is the level of transparency viewed through social media and the bombardment has kind of pushed us to reevaluate, like, what does that mean? Right. How do we, and how do individuals support each other? How do you have that conversation and not be questioned, or not be made shameful of wanting to keep yourself intact and better your well-being? I think those are things that individuals grapple. I do myself. So it's one of those things of learning to take breaks as opposed to being made to take a break.
Right.
Mhm.
You know
And-
what, if I could like add on to that, I think people
Yeah.
forget that you can't pour into others if you yourself are not filled up. And so we're in this interesting moment where even we get to reevaluate what self-care actually is. What does that mean? Where are sites of unburdening yourself? What does that mean to take a load off? Whether that's a nap or movie or taking a journal, you know, and writing in it, like what does that really look like? And it'll change per person. And I really think that we're like at the beginning of a true revelation or revolution in that capacity. Like in a decade from now, this moment, even though there's been a lot of heaviness around these 2 years, it would have kicked off for us all, hopefully, if we've allowed ourselves to take part in it, this capacity to have an awakening of really being inward, like retrospective, and being able to really assess and to make oneself whole. So hopefully we'll all take part in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot too, and I really think about our society and just sort of that narrative that has been in place in the society for so long, that it's about what do you do with your time? How are you productive? How are you generating something that can be a measured output of value, you know, some type of a commodity that can generate capital. And if that's not what you're outputting, then you're suspect first. And then if what you are outputting by just taking time to reflect and think and work through ideas, what you begin to output, if it's something that challenges, you know, an establishment, then it's even more suspect, right? So it's like breaking those cycles. And I think you all have been touching on this, that idea that sometimes to break that cycle, it has to be this stepping out, you know, this stepping out of it and gaining that other perspective and giving yourself that space to sort of like think through it and do that work, you know. And so I don't know, it's just something I see in both of the work that you make, both the artists are making. So
yeah, and it kind of leads into the next slide, is a quote from the write-up by Jenny Wu's Double Exposure. In a series of A Woman Named Vera, the twin I needed stands out not only because, sorry, I'm seeing the cutoff. Not only because it depicts Sutton's outside the context of her family, but also because it reveals a deeply vulnerable state of being lodged in the otherwise detached self-documentary style project. The double image throws open the concept of care and reveals the intricacies and contradictions of what we might thought was a straightforward transaction of give and take. In both Rivierre and Sutton's work for Museum Blue, the multiplying images of Black women ask the viewer, as the curators of Take Care Vera have, who is the caretaker, the survivor, and who cares for them? And I think that should be the kind of question that the show asks our viewer, and like that's what they should take away from it, is who is the caretaker for these survivors and who cares for them, and how does that translate beyond just the show and into a contemporary conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the function of art. I mean, you know, what does it do? I mean, if it is a mirror, if it is a reflection, but oftentimes it's a reflection that comes back with a kind of thoughtfulness that can only be arrived at through the time, you know, the time of doing the work and maybe detaching. But great. So I guess the next question, I'll move us along, unless there's anything else to add to that part of the conversation, is that in both of your works, you present images that are generated through the use of double exposure, and I'm wondering if you could each talk about how that process functions visually and conceptually in your works.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start this time. I didn't set out to do intentionally double exposure. I was actually really thinking about the glitch, and if more of the works from the series more glitchify or very visually glitchy in a way. And so for me, I was really thinking about this idea of an interruption, this idea of disrupting space through breaking up a form, but also a reoccurring theme in my work is cyclical patterns and like ritual and rhythm. And so especially in the performative work, by kind of splitting the singular image and showing the same motion in triplicate, just 1 second off or like a couple seconds off of each other. It's the same motion in repetition. It was just for me this opportunity to talk about how it never ends, how this cycle is something, you're redrawing your boundaries, you're resetting the space, you're reaffirming yourself. Like this is a perpetual cycle. And so for me, it was this idea of time and sequencing and mirroring this idea of, the cyclical pattern that kind of has to reoccur in our lives.
And mine is a little different from Alexis's view of repetition. And mine, it is more about a caregiver. It's more about someone that's a partner with you to help you take care of yourself. It is more personal than anything. And I mean, like, it's supposed to be personal. It's supposed to be this documentary about my mom taking care of my dad. And honestly, it was supposed to be about my dad living and surviving, although he's really sick. It turned into watching my mom take care of my dad because she was the other person always in the room. Like, it's hardly ever just me and my dad. It was always me, my dad, my mom. And in that way, we both, like the two of us, become caretakers of him, caretakers of each other, and then a survivor because he's passed away. So now we're both just kind of, well, we do take care of each other. We also just kind of feel lost in a way. Like, you spend 20 years of your life taking care of a parent or watching a parent take care of your other one. It sort of puts it puts a sort of pressure on you, and to make sure that person's constantly taking care of themselves. Like, this is their reward. Their reward for taking care of an ill partner is their kid taking care of them, and realizing that they're a part of a cycle too. So in a weird way, yeah, it is like a cycle. Mothers take care of their kids all the time, but at some point the kids get too old to be taken care of, and the mom gets too old to be taken care of. So at this point, roles reverse, and you end up being the mother-daughter to your daughter-mother or mother-daughter. So this relationship between us, and which is now what the work that I work in now, just kind of, I don't even know, just like translates into double exposures of Black women, of myself and of my mom. Just more people to take care of us than maybe we think is around us. And maybe that other person's stronger than us, and we can rest on them, even though that person is us.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for that. I guess I was really curious to hear you both speak to that idea, and when we look at the work, and of course your performative work, Alexis, and we have some of that on the website, the video, but when you're looking at a static image, and that image is portraying or talking to us about this gesture or this action of caring, I mean, that is I guess for me, like, that's how I kind of started thinking about, just like that something as simple as suggestion of motion or movement, or that energy transferring and it being caught in that static image, is how I kind of was coming to it. But
yeah, I would agree that that's definitely there. It's what pulls you into that image. It's static and it's both energy at the same time. I don't know, as we're talking about this idea of like multiple images, overlaid over each other in cycles, is this idea of like duplicity and multiplicity, right? Like these multiple things are happening at once. You're the caretaker, you're the survivor, and you're the caregiver for yourself and others. Like you're all of these things at the same time. You're constantly figuring out how to transfer that energy. I think that's the interesting thing about the conversation, is that it's like a but and conversation. Like everything is, I need to be cared for, but I have to care for others. You know what I mean? Like it's all of it at the same time. It's this never ending question mark.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's part of what makes the work so powerful and accessible, is that it speaks to these truths and these very authentic life experiences, that human experiences. So thank you.
Yeah, I think both of your answers were really heartfelt and thoughtful in the way of how do you think about this level of double exposure, and what does that mean, and whether it's through the glitch and this kind of multiple image or movement that is equated through the act of that is being performed, but also for Tiffany, that second individual in that portrait is I don't want to refer to it as a ghost image, but like as the unsung hero or the unsung individual that takes care of the person who doesn't always put care for themselves first. And I think that's important, of thinking about who is the caretaker and the survivor and who does care for them. And how does that speak to your audience and the individuals viewing the work? Because I think like in some regards, Tiffany's work is very much of a outside of documentary, but also set in it's a universal time period. And then Alexis's work is very much of like this almost alternative verse of like where the glitch is when we see the kind of split between, like that's when we see like this is the verse that's coming through to reality, and this is the healer that is coming to clear the space, like almost caring for the individual who doesn't deem that they have time to care for themselves because they're caring for others. So it's an interesting kind of, and this might be just because that I've watched a lot of sci-fi imagery, and this kind of bridging of reality and the multiverse, and when does that come together, and how do artists kind of play with that? I don't think it's a contemporary idea, but I think like it's something that's coming out through media, through television, through movies, and it's like, okay, how do artists interact with that, like media focused?
Right. No, I love that idea, Lauren, because it's, when you look at these two artists' works on the website and you see Tiffany's work, and it feels very kind of familiar, and it represents something that I think we can directly connect into. But the things that are unfolding in those images are things that are so powerful and so important to the human condition, that Alexis then sort of offers us those kind of, I don't know, like almost the gods in another dimension that are acting out and and are the ones that are, you know, healing, and are the ones that are breathing, and are the one. And so I love that these two works, you know, are existing side by side for this show.
I will add, because I almost never say it, they are intended to be like these spirit goddess beings. Like that's exactly the read that you're picking up on, which is cool to hear. But yeah,
good.
for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think like it also works well that they're not live performances, that they do have this kind of interdimensional interaction with them. Not saying that I don't think that the live performance would not be powerful, but I think it would like transform. It would be in a different conversation, and like this kind of pushes into that ethereal, omniscient character that I think needs to be in the world.
Yeah,
I almost feel that Alexis's characters are what I would pray to of someone who would give me my twin. You know, I'm very into time, sci-fi. If anything on Star Trek was based on repeating time or going back in time or meeting your past self, then I was definitely in love with it. Like the idea of going back and not reliving, but being able to correct some things and to remember some things a little bit better. To reflect on them from the past has always been a dream of mine, is just to go back and reflect on the time that I did spend at that place and at that time. Reflect on myself and see how I've grown and what I've accomplished and what my mom has accomplished. And just wondering that, like, if that Tiffany was to want anything, it'd be a twin, but who would she ask for it from? You know, I always ask my mom, have another kid, you know, of course, Black mom is that's who the goddess is in your life. At least in mine, like she was the god in my life. And it was just, you know, anything I wanted, she managed to create. And if I really didn't need it, she managed to give me a solid reason for why I really didn't need it. So she did kind of perform as this all knowledgeable person. So I definitely see a lot of Alexis's work. And I kind of want to see it as a performance, because I want to feel the energy that she takes into it and puts into the project and our performance and pushes outward. To feel that energy seems important. But as a visual, it does manage to reflect nicely on and bridge both of our works together nicely.
Agreed. So I think we're gonna open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, we do also have one extra question if no one has questions. Or if you ladies have questions for each other or have questions for us, there's kind of, it's an open forum of questions. I won't say questions again.
I guess I would ask Alexis how she performs in this space where you can't have a crowd. How do you take those pictures and still act in a way that's not just a self-portrait?
That's a whoa question.
Sorry.
No, so maybe this is the best way that I can give that answer. Here's the fun part about that, the freedom of not having an audience. So, or maybe I'll say, before I say what the fun part about the freedom of not having an audience is, because you see the result of that, I'll say having an audience, while, you know, I get the feedback a lot that there's this idea that there's something that people miss. And I do have an audience. Like that performance that is on the website, there were 2 onlookers. They were unassuming public. They just happened, I was at a residency, they just happened to walk through and they like stopped. I almost always have an audience. It's just never an assembled audience that has been like an art audience. And part of that is because like we know how to behave at an art gathering. We come, we sit, we watch, we eat, we consume, you know. So there was an audience, just not an assembled audience. The fun about not having an assembled audience is that the work can be pushed and bent and melded and like formed in another way. That idea of a double exposure doesn't happen in the live, you know, performance. It's me reacting to a camera, whereas me reacting to an audience would maybe be the same thing, but not, you know what I mean? Like I would be performing that to whoever's in front of me. And so the decision to do either or is just mostly what's necessary for what I'm trying to do. Is it possible that one day I could choose to have an audience? Maybe. But it would be because I would deem it necessary for whatever the conversation was. And at this point, for all of the characters I've created thus far, especially with previous works, the unassuming audience has given the most authentic responses in engagement. And then for this current work, I don't know that I would say it's necessary. I like the capacity to then, from a studio perspective, be able to get into the lab, which is my computer, and like push color and, you know, layer and all of that. That's not gonna show up in the physical, you know what I mean? Yeah. So like it is total different performance when you see it that way. It's just different.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Have you thought of projections?
I have. Yeah, I have. I don't know, like, you know, all and so like that's a layered question. The reason why I was like, ooh, that's a question is because it's like the question of like where I am, what's in proximity to me is always considered, right? The question of color is always considered. Like there's a lot of things that are being considered. And so like when you say like, have you thought of projections? I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but it's like, if I'm projecting, what am I projecting? Where am I projecting on? You know, and for what purpose? And so that's the question. That's why it hasn't been used as of yet, has been because it hasn't yet accentuated what I was doing in a way, or been an extension of what I was doing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm curious about process on your end. I know you're shooting in studio, but how do you see any parallels between this work that you did with your parents and like your current work, as far as like I just realized we have two new faces below. Sorry, I got distracted. And your current work, like as far as you're doing a lot of double exposure work right now, like do you see parallels in that conversation or like in your process?
Definitely in process. I feel like the earlier work of the double exposure was inspired by what I do now. For the longest time, I took single images or photos, and they didn't have the same meaning to me. There was always a double meaning in the binary and in the simpleness. So that double image was a fruit, was an object, instead of just another person, just the same person seen differently or shown differently. A lot of my friends that I have now, we have days where we are like, let's just hang out with us. It's called the Black Girl Soiree. It's awesome. And we just hang out and reflect on our weeks and on our past weeks, our past days of the week, the past month, and reflect on the future. So I feel a lot of that is, if I were to take a picture of it, it would be 4 people talking to another group of 4 people. So 8 people all together would be having this conversation of past and present and caregivers and taking care of each other, but also surviving that. I mean, it's a very diverse group of mothers and artists and musicians. So in a way, it's in a way we're taking care of each other. Like before, what you said with your images and your performance is, you know, you look to the left, you've got another person to take care of. You know, you and then the next person over there, and then the next person over to their left and whatnot. So it's just a matter of, I don't know. I guess it's just a matter of being, in a weird way, healthy, I guess. You know, seeing it as healthy. What I'm working on now is in studio, and a lot of it is made to look like a house, like a room in a house. And like my house, my current place, and other places that I've lived. And I think the importance of that is to copy, is to replay what happened in my younger years in my household, but also recasting myself in a weird way. And also just seeing things that I never had before, seeing people I never had before. Does that make sense? It's kind of rambling.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Are there other questions? I see that the camera came up on Andy and Laura. I didn't know if maybe there was a question there in that group.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I might have kind of a combination of a comment and a question. I don't know if you guys can see me. My picture's not coming up, but that's okay. I know performance artists often inhabit characters and personas clearly. Musical artists do the same. You know, Bob Dylan reinvented himself many times over. David Bowie went through the Ziggy Stardust, and Madonna had a new persona every couple of years. But I haven't really heard it that much just with visual artists. And now I'm going to start wondering if that artist created that piece of work sort of as themselves, or were they kind of taking on a persona? Was this Tiffany doing this particular piece of art, or maybe that was her unseen sister? Maybe she was inhabiting more of that persona when doing it. And you know, similarly with the masks, I'm just wondering if you had any inspiration from other visual artists who took on characters and personas, you know, like performing artists often do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good comment and question. To say who am I, like who's the person creating my images, I would always say it's me. I'm always the mastermind behind the double person. So it's never, because I'm never anyone else. I'm always me. I just add another person, like an aide to help me. It's like I'm acquiring an assistant in my life to help me with my mental illness, or with my parents, or whatnot, or work or whatnot. So although I'm very inspired by the likes of David Bowie and Bob Dylan, and you know, it's as being a visual artist, it's not my intent to make myself appear to be two different people. It's my intent to make myself be all people.
Yeah, I think they would probably say the same thing. David Bowie didn't become Ziggy Stardust. He just used that persona to further what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say there are a few examples that I'd say is in my family tree of performing-esque artists who kind of paved the way for me to function in this way. Particularly thinking about Adrian Piper, performance artist who would perform in drag and become a man and like walk around smoking a cigarette, reciting just short poems that she'd written. But you know, talking about difference and really inserting herself in New York City, I think in the 70s or something like that, to confront difference, especially as a fair-skinned Black woman, and how she was responded to. I also think about William Pope Ill, and he would do these crawling performances, often dressed up in a suit as like the Black man who's going to work. But like, what does that mean when he's crawling down the streets of New York City? But even like Trendor Hancock as he like draws himself as a superhero, and it's like Torpedo Boy, but it's himself as his character, and he's like, you know, in this super world that he's built. And so in many ways, in looking at the way that they were able to talk about difference or like struggles or whatever they had encountered in their world, I've been able to do something similar. A lot of my, it's weird to say older masks, because I always say that all of my characters are still very active right now. They're not, nothing's passed yet. But some of the older works, so to speak, were about tapping into parts of segments of myself, things that, you know, different segments of myself that necessarily weren't I wasn't displaying oftentimes. So I would talk about my experiences with anxiety or like personal touch and in respects to like, you know, whether you give access to your body to other people or not, or, you know, what does it mean to put yourself in a flag and like take a knee and like die cyclically in response to like protests, that recent protest. I was able to kind of tap into myself more through the characters that were like mirrors of myself in a way. I think this is the first time I'm working on entities that are not meant to be me, but are meant to be these kind of spiritual-esque beings that talk about conversations that may also be happening in my world, but they are separate entities. So it's an interesting space to be able to perform the likes of someone else, because it does give you that freedom and liberation to like do beyond what you would. But now that I'm working with like external entities, there's a different kind of play happening there, because I get to build their narratives, and their narratives are separate from my narratives, and it is a little more sci-fi-esque, and like there's a lot of like my religious background, like other things that are being woven in, and so I get to play with things in a way that I don't think I got to before. You know? So there's lots of room to explore.
Well, I really love that you reference Adrian Piper. I think that performance was the mythic being, and it's, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, now that you say that, Alexis, I'm like thinking of, you know, the one who breathes and the one who heals, and it's like these are these kind of enigmatic figures that, you know, we hope that they're among us somewhere, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I kind of have a question, and I apologize if you sort of covered this. I had to take a couple of dog walking breaks. But in terms of this time period, you know, I guess mostly with COVID, you were saying, Alexis, like kind of just having this realization or time to allow for self-care and to start, you know, maybe engaging in more of a ritualistic behavior, whether it's just setting time aside for yourself, just kind of finding space to care for yourself, whether it's your inner child or your twin, and just how does that affect your work going forward? Like, do you see that is going to have a profound impact, just having this time and this maybe realization now of self-care? How will that sort of impact both of your work going forward?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about intentionality with time. And so like as makers, as producers of entities, you know, we're expected to be on, we're expected maybe to produce so much in a certain time period. And so like for me, it's about pacing. Like when do I need to be in this like mode of never stopping? And then when do I need to retreat because it's like, I need to, right? When do I need to, my work is, it sounds weird when I say it out loud, but it's like, it actually, since it's always about personal narrative, at the root of it is a lot of me in there. So it's like, when do I need to write? And that's going to eventually be in the work, but like, when do I need to write more? When do I need to record more? For me, I segment a lot of different ways of making my practice happen so that I can find moments of rest and care within there. It's not always, this is why I don't like just perform, right? There are seasons of performance, there are seasons of sewing. For me, I find myself having seasons of making collages and other types of work. It creates balance in my practice. So that's not a new thing necessarily, but it's something maybe that I'm a little more aware of. And moving forward, I'll be more intentional about, especially as I would assume that myself and Tiffany, we have these hopes for like bigger, better growing careers, right? And so
Oh,
as
yeah.
these things get bigger, these will be conversations we'll have to have more delegation of tasks, et cetera. Like, how do I make this something that I can do feasibly and still make sure that I'm a whole functioning human being on the other side of it all? So, yeah.
Yeah, like I was saying before, in my way of taking care of myself is hiring someone else to take care of me. Or having my mom take care of me in a way. I know that sounds very weird and maybe like spoiled in a way, but I can't do it all by myself. What my mom would tell me when I did say I could do it by myself, that you're not an island. You know, you're country and you're connected to other people. Your land, that you're connected to other people, and other people need help and you will need help too. And you can pull on them. And she mostly meant family. And I mean, it makes sense. It totally makes sense that, yeah, you're never an island. So when I do create images of myself or of other women, what I'm doing is making them a world, making them a planet of a person to take care of themselves and other people, and someone to take care of them.
I totally get that from the twin image. You know, that piece just really resonated with me, just that whole idea of, you know, maybe looking inward sometimes for that self-care that you're not getting from the outside. And just, you know, I was just wondering, like, for me, it seems like this amazing sense of empowerment to have that realization that there is somebody within you, whether it's an alter ego or, you know, it's very empowering to me.
Yeah.
I do love that. I guess it might be a euphemism of your mom telling you that you're not an island. That's a very mom thing to say. And I think it's always like a nice reminder from individuals who have cared for us for long periods, like brought us into this world. And they know like parents have this ability to know their children more than at times they know themselves. I know that I had that relationship with my mother. But it is that kind of fear of, as parents get older and then the roles switch, and so it ends up being this like, who's caring for who, and when does that switch happen? But then there are those moments where they have that ability to also almost give you permission to know, like, you aren't an island. You do have individuals who care for you, whether they're family or whether they're not. And you have to take those individuals into consideration, which is really, I think we all need that reminder a lot of the time. But yeah, no, this is great. Wonderful. Any other?
I just want to say it's been really I don't know, just wonderful working with both of you, you know, through this project. And you know, I known both of you in different capacities along the way before we got to this project, but this has just been really a special thing, and I appreciate you both and this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, this has been a wonderful show, and really kind of getting to know you guys in this type of capacity, and kind of exploring these new notions, which I don't think they're new, or I think new ways of talking about care. and the importance of that, and actually getting to know the both of you a little bit more. So I think it's been a great show and a great honor. So thank you.
Oh,
Likewise.
I appreciate you asking me, and being a part of this is awesome to me, and it's fulfilling as well to show this work.
Mhm.
And to show with you, Alexis. You're amazing.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Amazing. So does anyone, final questions or comments? Thank you for joining us. I'm going to attempt to stop recording.